We've been looking at a number of movements that are embracing pure abstraction, moving away from any kind of obvious representation into something altogether different. And so we've looked, and many of these movements have connections with each other as well. For example, the futurists on the left of Bala, and the Orphists and the purists on the right of Leger, both are sort of jumping out and moving toward a kind of art that doesn't attempt to reflect visual reality. Maybe Leger more than Bala, in that it's only composition, it's a contrast of forms. They might look like something you could see in the world around you. They might look like drums or whatnot, but they're not. They're not meant to sort of direct you to something that you could see. Bala, on the other hand, suggests that this comes from looking at the sun through a telescope, and there is a sort of sense of that, the way light expands out, a migraine effect, with it. But at the same time, if you didn't have a title, you'd be hard-pressed to find that, right? It's really divorced from what it's looking at. And again, there are so many different connections between these groups. Delaunay also uses telescope metaphor, even right down to the round canvas, but again divorces this from any kind of overt representation of works of things in the real world, even though the title suggests it. And again, without the title, you might still be just as hard-pressed to come up with what he's trying to represent. The reason I'm recapping this is that we're seeing all this happen right around the years leading up to World War I. The American Stanton McDonald writes, he's a musical connection for his colors, even though, formally speaking, he looks a bit like the purists and a bit like the Orphists. This synchronism is what he calls it, where he sees color harmonies similar to musical harmonies, that there are color shifts that can be put into a scale, just like musical notes. And then, of course, other people who are interested in the idea of painting sound, which is, I think, there for the synchronists, whether it's Kandinsky or Kupka. Both of them have taken sound as a springboard for one of the ways in which they're divorcing their works from the obvious objective world around them. Right? So we've seen this already. Artists after 1910, and really right around the years 1912, 1913, 1914, embracing abstraction. But regardless of which ones we're talking about, there always seems to be some small foothold in the real world, And then we get to Piet Mondrian, right? Who I absolutely adore as a painter. But it's gone, isn't it? I mean, there is nothing left of the objective world here. There's nothing left of representational art. He's another of these artists who begin to go over the edge, if you will, to non-representational painting. And even though these are both dated about a decade later, he starts that transition at exactly the same time, right? In the middle of the 1910s. It's a process for him, and one will eventually go over, not today, but soon. And he arrives at this signature style. You fashion people, right? Isn't there a Oscar de la Renta dress, or I can't remember this.
Yeah, but there was a designer who did a Mondrian.
Yeah, did a Mondrian dress, I can't remember, early 60s, right? It was the Partridge Family class. When I was growing up, right, a TV show, he's just kind of everywhere. And you see him all the time. You've sort of seen these things before. He arrives at this, he starts to move toward abstraction about 1913, 1914. And then he arrives at this signature style, which is characterized by nothing but horizontals and verticals. Nothing but black lines. Nothing but variations of white with three primary colors. And he arrives at this solution around 1919, 1920. And once he gets there, he almost never leaves it. You will not see greens, purples, pinks. You're not going to see any of the secondaries, the tertiaries. You're not going to see the primary colors modulated with black or white, pure colors. Okay? And once he arrives at that solution, then okay, so the whites do vary. White plus black and the three primaries. That's what you get. You get some grays, but they're never really a dark gray, right? In fact, I underexposed these a little bit so you could see the differences in color. Because again, Mondrian should be experienced live, as most are. But the reason is that some of the differences in color are so subtle that the 5 steps it takes to get from the gallery to the classroom, right? My camera, Photoshop, this computer, that projector, right? All of those steps mute the actual experience in one way or another. So the grays are never really, when we think of gray, right? The color of my glasses lens is gray, but it's never like that, right? It's never that dark. Blacks and whites, and the grays are mostly white. But they range from cool to warm as well. It's really about as reduced or as simple as it could ever get. No curves, no diagonals, right? And when he gets to this point, when he arrives at this perfect purification of art to its most base and simple forms, right? Reduction to simplicity. He titles what he's doing the style, which is simply Dutch for the style. And it's important the part of that, right? It's just as important as style. Because by calling it the style, he suggests there isn't anything else. This is it. This is the style. Right? And everything else builds on this. Right? Now, for Mondrian, one of the motivating factors to get into this point is something that we've talked about on a number of different occasions. He was a theosophist. He read the writings of Madame Blavatsky and others. And remember, the central tenet of theosophy was that at the origin of mankind there was one religion that sort of ended up influencing all religions, that all of them were just reflections of this central, original religion philosophy. And that, if you can get in touch with that, you can find also the core harmony that lays behind the chaos of the world. So as Mondrian strips away all elements of representation to arrive at an art that is this simple, he's certainly, I think, channeling these theosophist ideas. The idea that behind what we recognize, behind what artists have always represented, there's a harmony. And the only way to truly show that harmony is to get rid of representation. Kandinsky was a theosophist, right? He too was moving in very much the same direction, although with a totally different style. For Mondrian, he was starting his career, he's Dutch, okay? And maybe you can tell by the style part of this, he's Dutch. But like many international artists, he was attracted to Paris and wound up there around 1910, spending significant time there until the outbreak of the war, when he moves back to Holland, as many expatriated artists had to, where in fact Holland remained neutral through most of World War I. And this is where he develops this singular style. While back in Holland, he meets a theosophist, philosopher named Schoenmakers, shoemaker in English, right? M.H.J. Schoenmakers. Schoenmakers. And he was a modern, Blavatsky was long dead by this point, but Schoenmakers was a contemporary of Mondrian, and helped sort of coach Mondrian on how to apply Theosophist ideas to art. And it was Schoenmakers that said that our entire world was shaped by a pair of opposites, horizontals and verticals. Everything in the world is shaped by the intersection of horizontals and verticals. Shaped, right? Shaped by the intersection of horizontals and verticals. And everything in our entire world is based up of some combination of the three primary colors. Red, yellow, and blue. And he advised, encouraged Mondrian to make paintings that focus on that binary opposition of horizontal and vertical, and focused on those three colors that are the building blocks of everything that you can see in the world around you. Right? So it's Schoenmaker's ideas that he's channeling as he arrives at this signature style. But remember that Schoenmaker's, like Mondrian, is interested in these theosophical ideas that go back to the 19th century, that point to the idea of chaos behind harmony behind the chaos of the world. One of the things that Mondrian does that is far in advance of anyone else up to this point is that his works stop having a subject matter. In all of our other abstract works that we've looked at, we've seen illustrations of things. But with Mondrian, there's no real discernment of what is the figure and what is the ground. What is foreground, what is background in this picture. It's an overall composition. Does that make sense to you studio people? Right? There isn't something against the background. It's just the grid. And everywhere you look, the grid continues. Sometimes it's made up of blues and yellows and reds. Sometimes you might only see the yellow parts of it. Right? Sometimes you might only see the red parts of it. You almost always see one of the colors. But this is the central motivation behind turning his canvas on the 45-degree angle. Because the grid doesn't change. Right? What ends up happening is that this canvas becomes, I don't know, what's the word? A window through which that, it's kind of like the Matrix. You know, when Keanu can see past the world around him, and he sees, except it's the opposite of that. Because the Matrix, when he sees past the world, it's all crap, right? It's all like blowing up and burning, and people in pods being things stuck in their heads. Right? And that's covered up by this sort of nice world around him. But he sees through that, Mondrian sees through the Matrix, if you will, through this perfect harmony. And it doesn't matter where he turns, everything isn't horizontal or vertical. It doesn't turn with the canvas. Right? It stays the same. Because the canvas is the portal. Right? Through to that perfect gridded world of perfect reduction and simplicity. Right? And he even gives them these weird names, lozenge compositions, when he turns them on end. Right? That's a lozenge. Even though we think of lozenges as being oval, right? That's the throat lozenge, right? What you suck on when you've got a sore throat. It's an oval candy thing that makes your throat feel better. Well, they don't look like lozenges, right? They don't look like oval. They're simply diamond shaped rather than square. And he has a vast preference with these canvases for square canvases. Early on, he does some that are portrait or landscape proportions, right? But as he reaches this perfect purification, he also starts to use square canvases. Right? As again, because I think what matters is that part that's showing through. Right? So the grid is something that just exists, and Mondrian's job as a painter is to visualize it. And the canvas is the that the canvas could be any shape, and he could still do that. The others that have been moving to abstract, like we talked about, always showed objects within the canvas. You can identify. When we talked about Kandinsky in class, I asked you sort of, what can you identify in this picture, right? Mountain tops. Remember, this one had a rough approximation of a figure on horseback with a lance, right? And a dragon barking back at him, right? There's always something to look for there. There was always a subject matter somewhere. Mountains over here, right? A sun in the sky, rays of the sun over here. There's always something to look for. Not the case with Mondrian, right? Not the case here. None of these squares or rectangles are meant to represent anything from the physical world. They're not derived from that by any way, shape, or form. Even Kupka, who is far more abstract, I think, than Kandinsky in these early years, is still giving us things that might be identified as, the blare from the trumpet, the sound from the siren, registered in color, registered in shape, that exist against a background. Mondrian has gone further than all of them. Mondrian is working in a idiom that abolishes the idea of a figure, whether it's abstract or not, against the ground. Right? You can't tell me what part of this is foreground and what part is background. It just doesn't exist that way. When I put my lectures together, I often belabor the point, but you can think of Nadal right as well as simply having shapes against the background. Right? Shapes that overlap each other, and some of them in the front, and some of them in the back, and some of them as object, and some of them as negative space around that object. And that's not the case for Mondrian. Right? This age-old idea of a figure-ground relationship is still gone. This is, I think, a kind of an important theoretical point for Mondrian on two different issues that I think are important to the way he's thinking of painting. First, he's obviously not, as I said before, not trying to paint anything in this world, right? The painting does not point to anything outside itself, right? Even Kupka points to sand. It points to something outside of the boundaries of the canvas. It's a signifier, right? It's a sign that directs us to think about something else, something that exists, something that's tangible, observable with our senses. Right? The only thing that Mondrian's paintings point to is the theosophist idea of harmony, rendered utterly abstract. And that's why he, again, turns these things on a corner. They're like an X-ray machine, right? You know how the X-ray machine, you know how old X-ray machines work, where you'd walk behind it and I could see you, or the thing that's at the airport when you just do this and they can see you. It doesn't matter what way that machine is, right? If you could go this way and go around you this way, and it would still show you staying in the same direction, right? If the X-ray machine shows what's inside of you. That's what this is, right? This is moving in front of the wall, and by moving in front of the wall, shows what's behind it. And it doesn't matter whether that X-ray machine is this way, or even 60 degrees. You don't have to do that, but it doesn't matter, right? It shows the harmony. That's the only thing it points to. Well, one of two things. The other thing that people have talked about with Mondrian, I think this is really important, is that by not directing your attention to anything that you can observe in the world around you, what the painting does is point to itself. Any kind of references it makes is right back to this narrow three-dimensional thing. want to say two-dimensional, but really a paint is two-dimensional. This thing, right? That's what the painting wants you to focus on, is the fact that it is paint on a canvas, and nothing else, really. So the only thing that it really refers you to is the idea of its own physical nature as an object. And it sort of has both of these things, the sort of quasi-spiritual, supernatural idea that it's this harmony that you can't see. But on the other hand, it's simply an object with other objects on it. Those objects being paint, right? Canvas and paint. And in many ways, I might argue that while abstraction is a difficult thing, we talk about this not being representational art, abstract art. On one level, I think that these pictures are the most realistic paintings ever made. Because they don't make the paint look like something it isn't. You know? We think of realist paintings, are paintings where paint starts to look like a three-dimensional object, where the two-dimensional surface of the canvas starts to give the illusion, the shading, of representing three-dimensional figures. Through the placement of colors, we get things that come forward and go back in space, when it's all on the surface. That's not realism, that's illusionism, isn't it? When we've done that, if you've successfully modeled something in 3 dimensions on a 2-dimensional surface, then you've created an illusion. But is it perhaps, on a weird kind of way, more realistic to make a painting that in the end looks like paint and nothing else? Right? There's a new kind of realism there. The paint doesn't point you to something you can see. The paint points you to the paint. The composition points you to the composition. Right? It's not a cow in a field or a windmill. You know, there's no point in any of that for wandering. The paint simply refers you back to the idea that this is an object with paint on it. That's the ultimate reality, isn't it? It's not trying to be something that it isn't. It's just trying to be paint on a canvas. To emphasize this idea, he coined a term for this. Again, in Dutch, this is a bit of a mouthful. Nieuwe, that's new in Dutch. That's the root word for things in Dutch. Nieuwe beelding. There are two possible translations for that. You will often see it talked about as new plasticity or plasticism, a new plastic art. And by plastic, he means not plastic like Tupperware, but rather plastic as in solidity, right? Three-dimensional solidity. So, a new plasticism. And what he's saying is it's a new reality. Right? A new way of thinking about reality. Now, beelding in Dutch also means imagery. It means both of these things, right? A new thing, a new plastic thing, but also a new imagery. And if we think about the term imagery, it immediately conjures up the idea of representation, doesn't it? Imagery, right? Think of a poet's imagery, or the sort of ideas a poet might conjure up with their words. The evocations of the world around us that we can see. That's what imagery is, right? But a new imagery wants us to rethink what that is all about, right? And that a painting's imagery might not be something out there, but something that is right in front of us. The imagery is the painting. This is what's new about it. Okay. New plasticity, or plasticism, right? A new plastic nature. Okay. Right, new imagery, new plasticism, new plastic nature, if you will, right? Although I think that the idea of a plastic reality, right, that it's a different way of thinking about. See, for both of these, I think the idea of new means, what does new mean? Not the same as old, right? Okay, different from old, so it's non-traditional, yeah? And what he's trying to get across is that his paintings are there to convince us of different ways of understanding. Right? There's a very strong, in many of our modern movements, there's a very, very strong didactic trend to trying to get you to understand things, in a new and different way. And I think that's always been the case. They're just a little bit more fun about it in modern art, and a little bit more daring in the way they go about it. Most of great art through the centuries is art that makes us think about, it can't make you do anything, inspires us to think about our world in a different way. That's why we remember it. That's why we still teach it, even if it's ancient, 1,000 years, 2,000 years later. Why should we still teach this? Because there's something to learn about, reflect on the way we think about the world and think about it differently. This is why art is such an important part, I think, of a liberal arts education, is that it allows us to see things in a way that we hadn't thought of looking at them before. Right? And sometimes that seeing is observing and understanding the world around it, but sometimes it's also that very human reflection on what it means to be the person who looks. These difficult philosophical questions that arise with our own self-awareness, that we vocalize so often. And this is why it's so important, I think, for Mondrian and others, that they're so deeply immersed themselves into contemporary philosophical writings as the inspiration for what they're doing. They're just coming out of nowhere. They're just spouting off, but they're really immersing themselves in some rather fascinating, interesting things that are going on. And they're doing it at a time when the world is torn asunder by war, right? Or the first winds of war. Because that Europe, which is what we've been focusing on, is deeply embroiled in the worst battle, well, they thought, the worst battle ever, right? Between 1914 and 1980. On a human level, for many people it was even worse. Trench warfare, for example. Mustard gas. The first encounter with airplanes. All of this came in World War I. Machines that had been seen to be the great savior of man, the symbol of the modern world, gave us crap like tanks, that could be used to destroy much more efficiently than before. All of these things and just the idea of trench warfare, living in a muddy ditch for years on end, getting up to shoot somebody else, or see the other people that have been stuck in the barbed wire as they tried to come forward, and then mowing them down as they stuck and can't move, Scars on people's mentality based on such horror had never been seen. And I don't want to discount the horrors of World War II, but I think on a certain level we've kind of gotten used to it. I wasn't alive yet. But you'd already seen this stuff happen. There was something more of a shock and a destruction to the psyche after World War I that I think inspires many of these artists to keep moving away from the world around them and into something that offers refuge, that offers an alternative to all of that. Right? So, new plasticity, right? New imagery is the idea that this is an alternative way to think about the painted object. It's a new way to think about representation, realism, imagery. Breaking forever the rules of the past. This is part of the reason that Mondrian tends to leave his pictures unframed. They're often set against the backing board, and the frame that exists around them, you can see it just at the very top there, gives enough breathing room to the canvas that you, as a viewer, are given the opportunity to look at the edges of it too. That's new plasticity, right? It's that new object nature. And sometimes the blacks of the sides come around the edge. Sometimes they don't. And the point is that he wants you to look at it not just as a surface, but as an object, a new plastic object, right? That actually does exist in 3 dimensions. What a frame does in most art, right, is it covers up the corners, the edges, the lips of the painting so that the frame becomes the introduction to that window, just as it does in a house, right? The frame surrounds the window that allows you to see through it to something that's equally 3-dimensional. In this case, the lack of a frame reminds you it's an object, a 3-dimensional object. It's a paint and a canvas, and that's it. Right? The black square is terrific. I think I have a detail of that for what it's worth. One of the fascinating things about Monte is that once you get into a painting that has nothing but paint on a canvas, there's no representation, then you've got to be very, very careful with how you apply it. You can't just lay it in. You know what I mean? Because there's nothing else there but the paint. And so what we find with kids, and also in Russia, with Catherine Malaysian, which is going to the very same direction. And both of them, because you just got the square line and the areas of color, the areas of focus, the areas of visual tension in the face are the borders between them, right? Or are the actual thicknesses of the different elements. And you can see in the front of the right, I can see it from here, but how it's not painted consistently everywhere the same. Look at the vertical black line that comes here. And you can see how it actually interrupts the horizontal line on either side. It's painted separately, right? You actually match these out from time to time to paint them down. But then also, if you look at the edges between those, and those are 3 different colors of white, aren't they? Around that, yeah? A bluish one, a sort of greenish one, and then a much yellower one down below. But look at the edge between the white and the black, and how even though he painted the black exactly, he paid particular attention to the white coming back in and looking at that edge and paying attention to exactly bringing the other tape right up to that edge and bringing the sequence in terms of wet. And if you can see these even closer, well, you can make it out with the horizontal there, but it's also like that everything, when you see painted with a roller, it's the same composition, right? It's painted with small brushes. Do that. You know, he's working the surface with these different colors. You'll even notice that he varies the thickness of the lines and so it kind of soft away, so that the horizontal line comes across. It's ever so slightly different with this blue, right? Over here. And he spent a lot of time figuring that out, that he needs that to work with it. So it looks kind of like a sort of a cowardly comment. Gotta be good art. Easy to do. You got 3 colors and 2 kinds of lines and white and, you know, some black mixed in there. But have you ever mixed white and black, or black and white, that is? How fast is it in art, right? Using a drop or something, and you've already changed the graphic. Incredible, right? And it's also, by the way, you gotta have enough of a palette to cover that space adequately and not be able to go back and mix it again. Or have an area of the white that somehow looks like the sun of home in that area of light. It's not small pictures, right? They're not that big.
Yeah, completely mixed up too, whatever the thing is.
Indeed. And I think that's probably part of the reason why the colors vary in each of the squares. You also have other really subtle things. Look at the horizontal line next to the yellow. Next to the black. It doesn't come to the edge. The grid doesn't continue there. It just stops ever so short of the edge of the canvas, right? I find these things utterly fascinating because these little tricks that he's doing are what I think enliven the composition, right? Because all you've got left are those components, horizontal, vertical, components. You've got to pay a lot of attention to them. Not only achieving the balance between the red and the upper left and the yellow and the blue, right? Achieving that balance based on visual weight, right? But then also how do you put the colors to actually lay them on the canvas? And that's think monitoring is small. Right? This is why it's not that. And there are other people that do this by heart. Nobody is doing it. And all of them even acknowledge. You know, they would try to do it and they bring in purple and use it as never. Right? Check.
I was actually, trying to ask you about that line, that vertical line, that incomplete line.
This one down here.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's
usually the compositions go off the canvas, giving you an idea that it's continuing.
right.
And that's probably what you were getting at anyway, with this velocity.
Right.
But here, it sort of ends, and you don't know what's going to happen next, and it's weird because usually there are squares and rectangles. What are we expecting down there? An L?
Yeah, I wonder, or does the grid just end and something else come around it here that one finger goes out into those whites? Because I don't think this white and that white are the same. Right? So I'm not quite sure what happens down here. They're blending. That bothered the heck out of me when I saw it. And I'll tell you why, is because I had always thought exactly that is the grid continues, right? And the grid never ends, and all that ends is what amount of that grid we actually get to see. That's what ends. But that's complicated by the fact that sometimes the grids go over the edge, right? That they actually wrap over the lip of the canvas. Or in this case, that it stops. And I honestly don't know what to do with that, how to fit it in. Exactly.
Because all the other, every single other black line is coming off.
Yeah. There's another nice detail where I think on this one it skips by kind of quickly, but here I think you can see the meticulousness with which he lays down the white. And all of the strokes are horizontal, aren't they, in that white area up above. And then look at the attention he's paid to the edge of the blue, right? Coming right up against the edge of that black and laying it over the top of it. And sometimes the black is over the top of the other cover. Sometimes it's behind it as well. It's never easy, and you have to go see these things live. And I thought I had a detail of the black. The black is a separate color from the grid. It's ever so slightly lighter than the grid, so when you see it, you can see this corner. Oh, here, let me see if I can find it. I might be able to here. I've got pictures here. No, I just think it is everything, right? It's everything in art. Let's see if I can find that real quickly. Yeah. Yeah.
Right there, yeah, I did that.
Try doing it.
That's the back, and we were just working on laundry, and it was like, I can't believe this is I'm like, it just took me like 10. Yeah, so, I'm just getting the colors all right.
I don't think you can put it up on this projector. I think it's like hold it out. But go to the post, right, and see it, because indeed, and it's almost always on display. You can tell very clearly. And here you can also see, it looks as if some of the black is even blend in back into the yellow. And again, the paint is thick, isn't it? Look at the craquelure on the paint. He's really built that up. Well, exactly, and really doing wonderful things. The same thing exists in the lozenge pictures, right? I took this picture in Reiki Light out of the National Gallery, so you can see how he's actually worked this black line that separates the little white corner here. And it looks as if he's kept adding to it, you know, to get it right. It looks as if it might have been this nice here at one point, right? Or maybe even out here, and he's realized that it needed to be thicker for the harmonic balance of the different parts. See, this one's bigger than the other one. The other one's about like yay. It's about 2.5 square. And this one's more like this, quarter point, right? So I would say about 3.5 on the side. Do I have dimensions? Yeah, the lozenge is 4 feet on the side, 59 inches, so nearly 5, right? That's just under 5 feet. is that right? Yeah, 60 inches is 5 feet. So it's just under 5 feet on the side, and the other one, the Phillips picture is, of just under 2 feet on the side. So it's significantly smaller. They do range in size, although this is as big a one as I've ever seen, right? Is the lozenge composition from the National Gallery. What's coming up next? One more detail of this where you can see how he's developed those ideas. And I think the line that you're seeing here on either side, you can notice that the black line that goes up here almost have what appear to be like tire tracks, right? That there's a strip in the middle. I think it might be that he lays the white down up to here, lays the white down up to there, came back over the black. But then if you see these things in person, you come back over the white again to really intensify the contrast or the tension between those two things. Even over here, you can see where the black has changed. I think he's made it over the top of the red here. Right? It's not easy at all. And I think that in many ways, when I was a studio artist, I was very much a realist, and I used to always think this was chicken. But I really now, as I'm older, I think that this is significantly harder, because when you work with nothing, it's much more difficult. Just like you guys all struggle with that studio art assignment where you get a paint in one color, right? What a pain in the ass that is, right, as an assignment. But it's difficult to pull it off, right, to get anything good out of it. I always found. And working with less is really almost a harder chore than working with more, purposefully handicapping yourself, as it were. Sorry? No, it doesn't. It's not that it took him 4 years, but when you get a range paint like this, it means you don't know exactly when you painted it. So it's somewhere in there. It's after that date and before the other one, right? So he's not working on it for 4 years. We just know that he developed that style by this time. Yeah, that's a good question. These all the ones that have range paints, I should have a C in front of it, right? Circa, which means it's somewhere in that period. But we don't have he didn't keep a diary saying when he painted what or anything like that, right? We know that he arrived at that style at the early date of 1921, and we already know that somebody owned it by 1925. They didn't buy it wet. So it falls somewhere into that field, right? And the thing with Mondrian's career, one of the fascinating things is that once he hits this stride in 1918, like I said, he doesn't change it. Hardly at all. Sometimes you do get a few rectangular canvases, but on the norm he likes the squares. And he likes the primary colors with black and white. And he lived all the way to 1943, and that's basically what you get. And I just find that fascinating on a certain level, because we talk about other artists like Picasso who change with the wind. Every 2 or 3 months he's trying something different. But there's something kind of, I don't know, I think sort of inspiring and meditative about the idea of finding it and staying with it. Finding what you think is perfect and staying there. Now, there are some innovations at the very end of his career. At the end, he ends up moving into a few things I'll probably show you online that are in New York now when he was living in New York, and responding to New York City, but they still are rectilinears, right? They still are primary colors and horizontals and verticals, but he drops the black. Yeah, they're really very fascinating. This one too, you can't see it in this slide. Again, it's the fault of the projector as much as anything. But the black down below is also sort of painted, that much of it, separately from the black lines that outline it. And that's true really with every single work that he ever did. So these are really quite radical. I think they're probably the most radically abstract works that we've seen so far. No attempt to convey other sensory input, sound, or music, or whatever. They are as abstract as you could possibly get, unless you maybe just painted the entire canvas white, which some people will eventually do, right? because that's the next step, isn't it? Or to not paint the canvas at all, maybe light it on fire or something like that, you know? That's also something that someone will eventually do. But this is, at this point at least, by the first quarter of the 20th century, this is as abstract as we're going to get. How did he ever get there? This is how he started. 2 works from local collections, a self-portrait looking a little bit like Ryan Gosling on the left in 1900, and a very Dutch scene of a mill in Holland. He goes to say the mill from the Krieger collection on the right. A massive picture of the one from the Krieger. It's about 6 feet across the page. So he starts off, you know, it's not like he can't paint. It's not like he doesn't know how to create 3 dimensions and realism on the canvas. How does he end up moving from here and in the next 10 years to something radically different 10 years after that? Right. Where he's obviously embracing his inner Rembrandt on a certain level, you know? How does he get there? It's a tough bit to explain. It has to do with contact with the Cubists, moving to Paris around 1908, 1909, and seeing what the Cubists were doing. It has to do with other philosophers that he becomes interested in. And it's a slow process. He moves through some very expressionist style work. He starts to channel the fauves in some of his works. And then all of a sudden he drops color and works on line entirely. Some of them with recognizable subject matter. And then he goes back to Holland during the war, and he's all by himself. No other painters around. And he hits that other thing. Right? And does that for the rest of his life. Now, I think I'll put something up online that sort of traces those steps of development. None of those we have represented in local collections, but it's kind of a fascinating journey, you know, from Mondrian, the expressionist, traditional realist artist, to Mondrian, the abstract painter. But it's worthwhile noting that it didn't just happen overnight, and it wasn't because he somehow tried and failed at standard representational painting. He's very good at that as well. Jay?
Was your style accepted immediately?
Yes, it had an amazing, that's a good question, amazing impact. Because one of the, and that's kind of what we're saying next as well as this, one of the things about the style, since it brings to the new plasticity, right, the canvas, it brings to it that universal harmony. Then why should it stop with painting? Why should we only have it in painting? Why can't we have Neue Bildung or the style everywhere? Why can't we apply it to the way we decorate rooms or make furniture? You know? And this is all coming at a time when much of Europe is rebuilding after the war. And they're thinking, how do we rebuild the parts that were bombed out in World War I? You need to be able to do it on the cheap, on a certain level, to get things up fast. But they also want a new architecture for the new era, an era of peace. And these ideas are intended to transcend the painted canvas and are adopted by architectural designers and then have a huge impact outside of Holland itself. German expressionists start picking it up. The Bauhaus loves this stuff, right? And they want to work together with the style artists. So it's an interesting question. It's still, I think, perceived as being incredibly radical. I mean, we'll talk about that when we look at the most famous of the style houses, because there was one in Rotterdam, which we'll see at the end of class tonight. But it is a big question, because even today, 90 years later, it's still kind of a kick in the teeth, when you think about it. It's still a difficult, some people have difficulty with abstraction, because it is such a challenge to look at.
Everyone just seems to be accepting it, and the ism that we have done so far, there has been some kind of opposition.
Yeah. You think that's the Dutch tolerance that we always talk about? The Dutch is like one of the most tolerant countries in the world, And they're the most densely populated country in all of Europe. And despite the fact that they live closer to their neighbors than anybody else does, and in more compact conditions, they put up with more things from their neighbors than any other country. And it's one of the things we always talk about with the Dutch is Dutch tolerance, right? That's why, this is why kids go to Amsterdam to smoke dope, because it's legal, and you can go and find places that specialize in selling it. And it's like going to a coffee house in Seattle, it's exactly the same. And, sorry? And the red light district, exactly. You just sort of accept these things. And I think that's part of it. The other thing, Jay, is I think the people that would have reacted against this are not the kind of people that leave a written legacy. When you're reading, the stuff that you're reading ends up being, people who are art critics and also by 1920 are more accepted of avant-garde movements. So they've been around for a while. So I think these all things come together, right, to give us a sense of why there might be great tolerance for this. Well, Piet Mondrian worked in tandem with an architectural designer named Theo van Doesburg. And Mondrian stuck primarily to painted canvases. He did decorate his studio in the style decor. But Theo van Doesburg took these ideas, these theosophist ideas, and applied them to modern architecture. He saw it having a universal application, that architecture might be designed with color in mind to have that same universal harmony, to be nothing but horizontals and verticals, nothing but primary colors, black and white. And that means removing some of the standard ideas of house architecture, like a gabled roof, like window frames. Getting rid of all of these things in order to come up with a modern architecture where, as you look at it, you stop wondering how it's built, and you start seeing these intersections of floating planes. Start to think of it as being a manifestation of the grid that Mondrian reflected in his work. Van Doesburg, these are two plans for the same house. I think the one on the right, we're looking at it from the upper right corner. But again, he ends up seeing these as floating planes, metaphysical planes of black and white, and red and yellow and blue, that are meant to remind us not of how the house is built. In fact, they're meant to distract us from how the house is built and make us think instead of that the style harmony that exists behind the physical world. And I have to say that this is a bit of an anecdote, but when I was in grad school, my roommate Chris was, I studied Renaissance art, he studied modern. And we shared this wonderful apartment up way uptown, 181st Street. And I came home one day and he had painted one of the walls all blue, and another one of the walls all red. And then in his bedroom, one of the walls was all yellow. And at first I was like, just what are you doing? Took me down to our apartment. And then I started looking at it, and what happened is you stop thinking about it as a wall. You do, in the same way, a structural thing that holds up the roof, You started thinking about it as this plane of color that would then exist. So if you look at this wall here, right, on art, it's interrupted by the duct work, right? So you think of like this section of the wall and that section of the wall there. But if it were all painted one color, then you start to think of this plane, right? Not as a structural element, but as a two-dimensional element, right? In the same way that Van Doesburg has applied the color spirits, so that you don't think of this as a V-shaped wall. You think of this painted blue, or this overhang. Don't think of. Imagine if you paint that overhang, go to the stairs over there. Paint that like the style. I just feel that I want to paint the hall here, like it comes out of the corner of the style, right? And then it's like, here it is, the art department, and just like the well might be a style level or something. Just to broadcast that would be very, very easy to do. again when we get to do it. But you start to think about the space and the structure in a different way when it's designed this way. That you don't think about it, when you think about building, you think about what parts bear weight, what parts support weight, right? And the way that it's normally laid out, like this one's just a cube, so it's pretty simple, right? The walls bear the weight, not this room, but this building, ugly Gaia hall. Right? The walls bear the weight, and the other things rest on top of it, right? The rest on top of it. Here, things start to look like they're floating. So that blue line on the left that comes out right here, or this one over here, or this one, you become less and less aware of how they're supported, and think of them more as design elements, coordinated in space in the way that Mondrian's grid floats there behind it. There is one prominent example of this style house in Utrecht by Gerrit Rietveld, who is, again, working hand in hand with Duisburg and Mondrian. And again, you'll notice the way the house is put together, that some of the elements don't even join, right? That wall there, right, ends up butting up against the other wall, not in a solid corner, but in a way that you think of it as if there were two, like a house of cards or something, right? Where they're just happen to be up against each other, or the guardrail and sunblock for this balcony here just floats outside, as does that balcony there, or this one at the top here, floats out from the wall down below it, and the window inside, right, is all sort of permeating through. Everything seems to simply float. This goes back to Kate's question. This sits at the end of a series of row houses that are obviously brick and structural and solid looking. And here this is at the very end as the street wraps around. The Schroeder children were mocked at school for living in that crazy house, right? Yeah, and they made fun of them. How can you live in that crazy modern, right? And so there were some people that would definitely react against these sorts of things and have things to say. But like I said, enough time to actually put things in print, because
it's not completely new to me. It looks like it's a blast from the past with a futuristic wisdom.
Well, look at how many times we've seen European artists look to non-Western traditions, or even to antiquity, for their inspiration as they're trying to break free from the traditions of the 18th and 19th century, right? Think of Matisse looking at Greek sculpture and North Africa, right? Corbusier, who we saw before with that beautiful White House that looked like his purest paintings, wrote a book called Travels Through the Orient, where he'd gone down to the Mediterranean, around through Turkey, and brought in those ideas of terraced houses and his as well, with flat roofs. It's a very Mediterranean kind of architecture, right? This, of course, Utrecht is nowhere near the Mediterranean, right? So the opposite end of Europe. But I think that that's a good comment in that it's on one hand very, very modern, and on the other hand a different kind of tradition, right? Very different kind of tradition. I have some nice details of this. It's a fascinating building. I've never actually been myself. It's on my list of things to do. And I don't even know if it's open to the public, right? If you go there, there may be better pictures than this, right? But as we walk in, so now in this room, we're looking out at that corner that way, right? So this corner window that we're seeing here is this corner over here, right? And this window that we're here is kind of down on the side, okay? So this is a stairwell that leads down, right? And it actually leads up as well. There's a light room up here. I think this roof out there, right? So it's held inside this cage, which, as you can see, starts to look like a laundry station, doesn't it? There's horizontals and verticals, you get reds and blues. And even on the floor, you'll notice the paint and color going straight up the floor into these different patches. These bars that you see at the top are actually gliders, so that walls can come out and redefine the space. You push them back or bring that out, and we permeate the parameters of the room depending on your mood, right? And so the thing on the floor, if you can imagine this hole coming out here, it's going to line up with that. Anything in the wall is separates this red floor on this side from the blue floor on that side, right? And all of this, what this does, if you think about it, conceptually, what it ends up doing to you as you're inside the building, I would imagine, from my purpose, is the building stops being about solid structure, right? If the walls can move out of the way, if the floors are planes of colors, the walls are planes of colors, then you start thinking about it as a structure. And you start thinking about it instead as a manifestation of that style. A couple of the details to show you this. I think it's an absolutely fascinating application, and most of our modern artists are trying to figure out ways to apply their ideas outside of the simplicity of the painted canvas. Right? The windowsills painted the style yellow, the counter below it in that blue. And one of the things I particularly like about this picture is you'll notice that the window opens on the corner without a structural bar at the corner, right? So here, this window is swung open this way, right, from there. And this window is swung open this way from here. There, right? And here's the close, right? So they would actually come together and meet on the corner without a structural member there. Which means that when they're open, it blurs the distinction between in and out, right? Which further blurs the distinction between the structure's space that's being created entirely because of some metaphysical space. A nice analogy is back in the 50s, they started making a certain run of automobiles, late 50s, early 60s, where when you roll the windows down in the front and the back, there wasn't a bar between them. But if you roll the windows, roll the front windows down in the back, it became almost like a convertible. If you had all of that space open from, the front windshield all the way to the back windshield on either side of the car, right? And without that interrupting bar, and without that interrupting bar, they started to call these convertibles, even though they weren't, right? Because it gave you the sensation that you were outside, that the inside the car was innately connected to what's outside. And I think that these windows do something very good. The fascinating thing about that is if you have a house like this, you can't have additional furniture. You just have no place in this world. You can only live in a place like this if everything is right. We're right down into the room style, right? A perfect little white cube with a red interior for your ashtray. And look at the furniture as well. Right? Some of it has diagonals because you need that for comfort. But for the most part, it's horizontals, verticals, and primary colors. I don't know for sure. Right? If you were going to live in this house, I had an architecture class when I was in grad school, so you can see the walls moving out there, right? To break off that space. I had an architecture prof in grad school, was offered a Frank Lloyd Wright house to live in. But he could buy it. When something like this goes up for sale, they usually, it's not like an open sale, so that your question about as is, right? Yeah, because the person who buys it is going to be a special kind of person, right? Now this is a commissioned house, right? The Schroeder house was commissioned by the Schroeder family. They knew what they were getting themselves into, right? They wanted that. They wanted to showcase. And that's how a lot of modern art works. Remember the Picasso nude from the National Gallery was a commission piece for a library. You get an enlightened, right? Somebody who's in tune as a patron. They want something from somebody, so they'll go out and get it. When these things go on the market, they don't just list them on, Coldwell Banker or whatever, right? People will find out that they're for sale and buy into them. And usually they will notify people who they know would be interested in it, right? And so I had this prof, Rainer Banham, really liked him a lot. Talked about being offered a Frank Lloyd Wright house. And he said, well, can I spend some time in it before I buy? No big there now. take it for a weekend and see if you like it. So he did. The doorbell rang every 10 minutes. People want to come in and see. And he decided, no way I'm going to live here. This is not what I want. A showpiece of the business of people see it. And I got to tell you that every architecture student that goes to Utrecht goes and tries to find the Schroeder house. Right? And I might argue that if you guys ended up in Utrecht and you remember this class, like, let's go see the Schroeder house or something. I'd love to see what it looks like on the inside, to find out how all of this feels. What is the experience of this architecture like? It's kind of a quaint little cast iron stove there, isn't it? But even look at the lamp. The light hanging on the left-hand slide is a neon rod this way encased in a tube of rectangular casing. One hanging this way, not connected to, and the third one down below, right? 3 of them in 3 different directions, making up this little neon light that hangs in the corner. And you've probably noticed by now the furniture, right? This is also designed by Gerrit Rietveld. It's simply called the red, yellow, blue chair, which is the style principle of these floating planes, right? How are the planes actually held out? The back is hard to say, right? And it denies any kind of materiality. It's made from wood, but it doesn't look like wood. The paint destroys the notion of the structure and the materials that make up the structure. And instead what you see is the style idea of that harmony that comes from the pure simplicity, blacks and whites, reds, yellows, and blues, right? Horizontals and verticals. And of course, for furniture, you have to make some necessary alterations, right? Yeah. I would love to find it if they did. And I get the style like once every couple of years is when I teach it. And usually it's like this time of year where I'm so far behind in everything, I don't have a chance to pick up another book to get deeper into it. I would love to. There are other style architects, and there was even the idea that you could take a standing building and just paint it with the style colors, right? Like my roommate did in our apartment. It was still that color when we moved out, by the way. I wonder if it's still like that after Wash Heights. I'd like to try it, I think it's really fascinating. I built a cage for my plants in our community garden out back, and I painted it style colors. So that and it actually kind of worked, it was fun. So, that's it for today. I've got, my next slide is blank. So, remember that there are online some 10-minute art breaks to make up for lost time. I think after this we're going to go to Dada art. It's coming up next. We don't have much Dada art here in DC, so I should be able to cover that fairly quickly. And it brings together a lot of the things that are going on in the 10-minute art fixes. So do try to at least play those through, even if you don't take notes on them, right? Because some of those ideas come to play in Dada. Okay? I will see you then Friday.